I appreciate you all joining us this morning for our session on the evolving research enterprise, the role of foundations in strategic funding. We have, I think, a nice panel put together. Myself and Alex Grady-Reed are researchers that are studying this topic with a team that also is composed of Michael Roach from Duke University and Maryann Feldman from the University of North Carolina. We have Mark Crowell, who is the Director for UVA Innovation and also the Associate VP for Research at the University of Virginia. We have Elana Koustova, from the Director of the Office of Translational Initiatives and Programs from the NIH. And then we also have Max Wallace, who runs a foundation, CEO, President of the foundation Accelerate Brain Cancer Cure. And what we wanted to do briefly is to bring attention to the role of foundations and the growing role of foundations in academic research. What we see going on right now is that the share of research that's being paid for by foundations is growing. And in fact, right now, foundations are spending more money or fund more research than industry does. And so while we're seeing the foundation funding going up, other sources of funding, as they plateau and going down. So the question is, what's the role of this funding? But not only are they bringing money, but foundations seem to be coming in the door with a unique structure, a unique model of funding. And their funding is much more problem-focused, where they have a specific idea, something that they need to solve. They're funding what we think, or what they say is some of the high-risk, high-reward research. They're seeking out researchers that are specialists in an area, and they're forming teams across universities, bringing the best people together. It's also partnerships that are across sectors and across not only universities, but are bringing in firms and everything you need to move, to solve a problem, move forward. We also see that the structure of these grants are a little bit different than the traditional federal grants, in that they tend to have very much be milestone structured, where you need to be hitting milestones to get additional funding, and there's adjustment along the way. And then we also see that these are different, or appear to be becoming different, in the types of contract and structure that are underlying the grants. We're seeing new IP approaches to intellectual property. We're seeing more pressure or emphasis on data and data sharing in these projects. So we wanted to bring to attention some of the foundations that are getting involved in this. As I said, there's Max Foundation, Accelerate Brain Cancer Cure. Michael J. Fox has been active in this space. The MS, cystic fibrosis. We often see the folks coming in this model are those that are very interested in a particular disease and looking for a solution, way to move cures for that disease forward. So what we're looking at in our research is trying to understand where foundations fit in the broader university academic research funding. So, how do foundations fit in? Are they a complement or substitute to government funding? Are they really stepping in and funding a different type of projects that wouldn't get funded, projects that may be more riskier or on the cutting edge? What's the career impact for the scientists? If you're getting funded by foundations, how does that change the direction you go in? Do foundations come in at earlier, later stages of the research process? And then also, what are the real impacts on commercializations? Are we seeing that we're making progress, getting things out the door, progressing technologies that we haven't with other methodologies? And then, given this new framing and this new type of model, is this expanding and diffusing to other types of funders, the federal funders as well? So we've asked, what we'd like to do with this session is make it relatively informal. We've asked our three panelists to take 10 minutes to give you their view from their perspective of their organizations. I gave them three, as we see here, basic starting points and discussion points. And then we'd like to turn it over and have a little bit of Q&A with the rest of you all here and just see where it takes us. So I'd like to turn the mic that's not working over first to Max Wallace, and I have a slide up here for your background if you'd like.
Oh, thanks. This will be useful as we go through the discussion. I worked in universities, moved into biotech industry, and now have moved into foundations. So a highly unplanned career path, but useful, I think. for what I do now. And I run a group that I view as a special forces team for trying to find things to do to make brain cancer go away. We kind of do whatever we think it takes to actually accelerate new treatments for brain cancer through the process. And the reason we do that is our founder died of brain cancer. It impacted a family of determination and wealth, and they put together an engine that said we need to do more than was being done in the past. So my motivator is that I think every day about the death of this wonderful guy who was our founder, but also the fact that 48 people died yesterday from glioblastoma in the United States, and we haven't made much of an impact in it yet, as a group, as a government, as a pharmaceutical industry, as a foundation. So my motivating factor is to stop that, to keep those 48 people from having to suffer the same fate that our founder had. And it leads to a different motivation in how we go about things. In the old days, back when I worked in university technology management and then went off to found a series of biotech companies, this was the paradigm. The basic research was fueled by federal government money that went into university laboratories where diligent scientists would toil endlessly to unlock the keys to Mother Nature's behaviors. And we'd have a discovery. And then you'd write a paper, and your grad students would write a paper, and then you'd say, well, anything from here on becomes repetitive, and we can't do that because we have to generate new knowledge. So if they had run the ball out to the 20-yard line, they looked around for somebody to take the ball, and when they didn't, they said, well, publication's enough, and they ran back to the end zone and started over again and had this cycle of end zone to 20, end zone to 20. And pharmaceutical companies, starting in the 80s, would think about coming back some to take a handoff and run it down the field. It's how we started technology licensing offices. But it was very early stuff coming out of university, so it's hard to do. And we created this wonderful kind of hybridized middle ground model that if you could run the ball out to the 25 or 30 and start to show some application, venture capital, this new kind of money would come in and biotech companies would form. They'd run the ball to the 50, pharma would be waiting, they'd hand it off, and pharma would run it in the other end zone. That model doesn't work in life science anymore. Universities still kind of stop at the 20 in most cases. And I think Mark will give you some examples of how they're doing things differently there. Venture realized you can't fund that early. Venture wants its companies to get the ball on the other side of midfield. Pharma realized that they don't want technology and financial risk, that in fact it's easier to do Viagra 6 than brain cancer 1. It's much more profitable. So really they want the ball about the 20. So they are always in the red zone and able to move it in for profit. After all, their bonuses are not paid by doing novel things. Their bonuses are paid by getting to the bottom line. Why take extra risk? So all of a sudden you've got this model where if you're interested in new stuff, you've got to figure a way to put together a funding package that gets you out to about the 50-yard line before you get help, before you get commercial help. Universities and government funding from the goal line to the 2025. Biotech maybe out past the 50, pharma somewhere later. How do you cover 25 or 30 yards is the thing. And I think that's where venture philanthropy really started to kick in. We all saw the gaps, and there was nobody to do anything. And we set up these kind of interesting hybridized development mechanisms, funding mechanisms. I think one of my major jobs is not just providing funding, it's shining a flashlight on paths to get things done. I think my real job is not CEO of Accelerate Brain Cancer Cure. My job is to be a bioyenta. You know, I make marriages, I make relationships, I put people together, I lubricate them with money. You asked about metrics. The ones that I hammer at my group are impact, leadership, and leverage. We shouldn't do something if it's not going to make a disproportionate impact. Because my foundation was founded by entrepreneurs, which is why I got hired to come run it, risk is not a bad thing for us. In fact, the first criticism I got from my boss, who is the guy who founded AOL and is now on the cover of every business magazine all the time, Steve Case, he said, you need to take more risk. I don't want to see, backing into a football analogy again, running the ball into the middle of the line and gaining a yard at a time. It's not what we're about. Our job is to put the ball in the air and take risks. And that if we fail, that's what entrepreneurs do. They take calculated risks and they fail. So our job, in many ways, is to put money into places, to open up new things, to take risks that the system doesn't allow you to take, to move quickly to take those risks. And then if it doesn't work, you act like a venture capitalist. You have a portfolio and you go do the next best thing. And you try and break through this system. So I see venture philanthropy as the evolution of kind of foundation funding, where it used to be kind of basic research, or a nonprofit would be down way at this end as an advocacy group that would help patients find their way to new medicine. What I find is we skip as fast as we can through all aspects in the middle, with the end goal being new treatments for those 48 people there every day at the end of that line. And that's our one mission: impact, leadership, and leverage. Take risk. You got 48 people that died yesterday. Why aren't you hurrying faster? And that's kind of my mantra.
Hello. So again, I'm Mark Crowell, University of Virginia, and I'm delighted to be here. Thank you, Janet and Maryann and Reception for inviting me. I want to pick up on a few concepts that Max mentioned and maybe try to address some of the questions that Janet outlined in her opening remarks. But first, I want to give you a little bit of the landscape at the University of Virginia with respect to this area of research between these yard lines. And actually, I use Max's football field analogy all the time, but I'm going to change the yard lines. I think university basic research does in fact get the ball to about your own 20. I think venture capital and big pharma are down between the other 20 and the goal line. I think we've got about a 60-yard gap in between those 2 points, and so our job is to do a better and more effective job of traversing that gap and adding value and making more projects market ready, clinically ready, business or investment ready, if you will. At the University of Virginia, one of the reasons I was very attracted to go there a couple of years ago was because the university has really embraced this whole area of translational research and developing new strategies for traversing that great divide between the two 20-yard lines. And we probably have approximately almost $5 million in growing per year in different pots of money to help us do that. Probably the most effective and the most flexible of the funds within that $5 million pot are those that we have from foundations that are interested in the very kinds of things that Max has mentioned, either looking at advancing treatments for specific diseases, or in one case, the Culture Foundation for Translational Research, actually interested in the process of translational research and using their funding to help us advance projects in the field of biomedical engineering writ large, but focusing on what we can do to accelerate the progress of traveling through that gap from the 20 of this basic discovery all the way to the other 20 where you're starting to get into patients into clinics. In my view, it's really transformed the way in which academic science and academic research is being practiced, not to mention the way academic technology transfer and business development is being practiced, which has been the field I've been in for 25 years. So what are some of the benefits and challenges? Benefits, it's a wonderful adjunct to your basic research funding. It responds to what we're seeing anecdotally and what I think some researchers are starting to document, and that is more and more of our faculty, particularly younger faculty, are not only intrigued by their ability to be involved in that 60-yard translational gap, but actually expect to be. And one of the things we're finding is that we're more and more often asked to come in with new faculty recruits are being interviewed, and essentially we're not interviewing them, they're interviewing us, and they're wanting to know if they come to the University of Virginia, what resources, what capabilities, what networks and partnerships can we bring to the table to help them pursue this aspect of their academic and scholarly endeavors. So I think increasingly this is not something that's, I can remember 20 years ago, being told constantly, all we do is basic research and then we do the handoff. We don't want to get involved beyond that. And now I think we do. Another benefit, therefore, is it enables universities to respond to the increasing pressures, good or bad, like it or not. More and more universities are being asked by their state governments, by their alumni bodies, their boards of trustees, their funders, even our basic science funders like the NIH are more and more asking us, what sort of resources do you have in place so that if something important comes out of this basic funding, that there's a high likelihood that you can accelerate it toward the clinic or toward a commercial application. And so it's actually enhancing our competitiveness even for that bolus of basic science funding, which is and probably always will be the tail that wags the dog at most research universities. More and more of us are being asked to help create entrepreneurial and innovation ecosystems around our universities in in our regions. And again, whether you think that's part of the university's core mission or not, the fact is our governors tend to think it is. And most of the articles that you write about, that you read about this space, are talking about and documenting the fact that most innovation feeding business and economic activity in today's economy is coming out of universities. I saw some statistics recently from Bio that indicated, I think it was 20 years ago, about 25% of the new drugs approved by the FDA had their origin in an academic laboratory. In the last 3 years, it's almost 90%.
Yeah.
So the switch, the tide has turned, the flip is there, and if we don't do this and don't do this well, then I think the investment by NIH, the investment by donors, by state governments and others is going to be far more difficult to generate a value proposition or return on investment proposition. I think I'll stop there. You did ask us to address challenges. I think the challenges are easily managed. It is true that sometimes these foundations do put interesting intellectual property terms onto the funding that they provide, but what is more often the case is they put demanding criteria on the table for us to address, so that if we do receive their funding, we must create mechanisms to establish market and clinically relevant milestones and scientifically relevant milestones. We must meet on a regular basis and document our progress toward meeting those. We do talk about milestone-driven research and not aim-driven research. And we must exhibit the will to kill projects. If they're not hitting the milestones, then there's not some clear way to zigzag around those obstacles and try to create a new path toward success. I will tell you that at the University of Virginia, for the first year or two of these programs, as you might imagine, the scientists would say, what? I have to do quarterly reports? I would say that 7 years into our embracing of translational research and our participation in a number of these foundation-supported programs, it has become part of the weaving fabric of the institution. The culture has changed in a dramatic sense. It has promoted cross-disciplinary teams in ways that I think top-down is hard to do, and the president of EPR said work together, but this some of these programs require clinicians and basic scientists to work together. And it's even driven our School of Medicine to change its tenure and promotion policy to incorporate criteria that provide for credit toward tenure to be given for success in this translational arena. So those are challenges when they first emerge, but they're challenges that I think can be addressed in very productive and constructive ways. So I'll stop right there and let the other panelists talk, and then we'll get into our Q&A.
It is a pleasure to be here, and it is a pleasure to represent National Institutes of Health. It's, as you know, we administer and fund the majority of biomedical research in the United States.
Can you speak just a little louder?
Okay.
Without the mic, it's...
Okay. So, and it's very interesting for me to participate in today's discussion and to present our view on the same problem. And as you noticed, there are multiple features that distinguish funding that is being administered by venture philanthropy. And many of those specific features, for example, research that is milestone-driven, innovative approaches to IP, all those features are not, cannot be effectively utilized within NIH. And that relates to our very, very specific statutory authorities. So you know that we administer our funds through two mechanisms, through grants, which is a major assistance mechanism, and through contracts. So, there is a significant difference between those two. But what is interesting about grants is that it is an assistance mechanism. So very often we cannot ask not only about milestones, but there is no clear way for us to reinforce that that research is taking place, even if something happens. It is an assistance program. Also, very important is that you also notice that venture philanthropy funds highly focused research projects. So venture philanthropy by definition is created to address a very specific niche, very specific research area. Because the majority of our funding is being administered as grants, we cannot control what is coming in. So majority of our funding, majority of our research is principal investigator initiated. It is initiated by a researcher. So whatever researcher believes is important in this particular area is going to be submitted to NIH and is going to be considered for funding. So those are our difficulties. But I have to say that if you look at the venture philanthropy landscape and the models that venture philanthropy utilizes vary significantly, and there are 7 different classes, 7 different models that are being utilized. So, and within those models, the approaches differ. And also what is very important to remember is that all those venture philanthropy organizations are being driven by personal motivators, by personal passion and interest. And when I talk about venture philanthropy, I often use the example of Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. And because I work in this area, in area of biomedical research, every single meeting that has anything to do with drug discovery and development or with translation, every single meeting is going to be attended by representatives of Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. And they would be advocating tirelessly on behalf of their patients. And I would like to ask you the question, do you know the incidence of cystic fibrosis in the United States? It's 30,000, and it's 100,000 worldwide. So, and there is such a discrepancy between how they represent themselves and how they fight for their patients and their incidence of the disease in the United States. So this is also, I think, very dramatic difference, and it's absolutely remarkable to see those foundations in action. So the next example I can give you is Lou Gehrig Disease Foundation, ALS Foundation. And so they utilize a very interesting method of funding, and in contrast to NIH, which cannot control what comes in. So they can actually assemble a group of experts, and they would decide where and how we can make an immediate impact. And this is also very, very different. So they will decide their funding on probability of making immediate impact, not 10 years from now, not 15 years from now, but immediately. And Lou Gehrig Disease Foundation, their experts decided that instead of posting a problem to scientific community, such as let's find a cure for Lou Gehrig disease together, so they separated the problem in very, very actionable projects. And they proposed to scientific community to address only specific projects. So, and they identified, for example, as the most important problem in Lou Gehrig disease was a very typical problem that clinical trials take too long. It is just too long, and they are too expensive. And the reason for that was that they cannot estimate how advanced the disease is in particular patients. So it means that they have to enroll much more patients than a typical the typical clinical trial protocol would require. So they could not subdivide patients into appropriate groups according to their degree of disease progression. So when they decided, okay, so the easiest way for us to shorten their trial time and to cut costs would be to be able to stratify patients based on how advanced their disease is. So, and that very complicated question, how to find cure, was transformed into very actionable question, which is let's find a biomarker for this disease, and that biomarker would allow us to stratify patients. So, and foundation posted that problem for all the scientific for the entire scientific community to solve. And that project came with a very significant price tag. So they offered $1 million to whoever solves this problem, whoever finds the biomarker for Lou Gehrig disease. So, and the problem was solved, and last year that award was given to a group from Massachusetts. But what is interesting, and the reason I'm telling you this story, is that that research group, and if you are interested, I can explain to you scientifically what happened and what the biomarker is. But but that group would be the first to know that to let everybody know that they were able to solve the problem only because that lab, that same lab, was very, very heavily funded by NIH. So they had all the necessary bricks in place for them to be able to build upon those basic discoveries and to solve a very, very concrete problem. So this is an example of how we can basically work together. And NIH, again, because of multiple statutory restrictions, can only contribute the way we are contributing. So, but venture philanthropy, using their own unique ways, can capitalize on our investments, and by posting very inventive and correct questions, so they can actually push the entire area forward. I have many other remarks, but maybe we can.
Yeah. Are there questions that you have, or is there a direction you'd like us to run into?
Yeah, let me start out. We're sitting here, and talking about a perfect setting. Carnegie, philanthropy, he was doing this stuff. Yeah. This is the Carnegie Institute for Science, too, in tech. I guess a major issue that we all look at is intellectual property. Mm-hmm. And that's the 900-pound gorilla. On what side should venture capital or venture philanthropy land? I know where the universities, I think, should land, but there's huge tensions. Universities getting cut, the public good. So if you could comment in general about, do we need a new economy? Do we need something else?
Well, just in terms of the question of how should IP be addressed when working with venture philanthropy funding organizations, we try very hard not to upset the basic apple cart with respect to IP ownership. And it's not because we want to have our paws on it and want to control it. It's because once you start giving that up, the asset could go all kinds of different ways and become subject to restrictions that we can no longer control. So we try very hard as a university to maintain the basic Bible provision, which is our people invent, we own, you invent, you own, we jointly invent, we jointly own. What the effective organizations and the ones that are really providing, I think, the most value add as partners to universities are those that are that understand the full panoply of IP needs in the course of developing a new therapy, for example, and that create a construct or a framework so that as new IP is needed and brought in, again, there are ways to treat all owners within that construct, but that focus not so much on ownership, but on what's to be done with it. The Cystic Fibrosis Foundation was a great example. I can recall at UNC, where I was for 8 years, doing a deal with research funding from the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, where the university owned its IP. Where Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, however, required us in the agreement to essentially have a business plan attached and the IP or licensing terms predetermined. So they didn't need to own it, but they did have some very specific requirements on what would happen if that project was successful. Interestingly, that's a project that started in about 2001 that led to the formation of a company called Maryann Biosciences, which got a drug candidate all the way into the clinic without ever taking a dime of diluted venture capital. So the CF Foundation funded every bit of the development into the clinic. So if you allow me to be the capitalistic tech transfer doctrine. The 5% of that deal that the university owned was worth a whole lot more when that drug was filed for an NDA than it would have been under a more traditional VC-backed model. So that there's not one model that works in every occasion, but I think, and I'll be interested to see how my friend Max feels about this.
Yes.
I think the foundations that are finding the most successful universities are those that understand that the university has to have some degree of ownership and control if it invents, but we'll get very flexible in agreeing to specific pathways or milestones or other requirements to make sure it's utilized in development.
There are some interesting sociological dynamics that go on in this. I was well trained by Mark. We worked together at Duke, and he actually helped me negotiate my first company.
He usually says I helped keep him out of jail.
He was the graphite rod in my reactor. It was always useful to have a partner that keeps you out of jail. But I take a different approach. A lot of nonprofits want to live forever. A lot of nonprofit managers came up out of careers as social workers, and it's the best job they'll ever have, and they want to be there forever. I was a retired entrepreneur and got recruited to come back to do this, and my boat's waiting for me, and I want to get back to it. And I don't want 48 people to die tomorrow from brain cancer. And the best thing I could do is put my company out of business as soon as reasonably possible, and it's how we behave. We raise our money every year, and we spend every penny of it. And we go out and raise more money every year, and we spend every penny of it. We don't set up an endowment. It's a waste of money. It's a waste of time. I count this as lives and time and money as a constant. So anything that we do that squanders any of those resources seems silly to me. And I look at some of the intricate negotiations that go on, pre-aligning your licenses when you have no clue what you're going to find, who you're going to deal with, what it's going to be worth. What a waste of time to me. My contract's a one-page contract, and I make no intellectual property demands whatsoever. It's the market's going to work, and as we put these deals together, we're going to figure out how it works. And the goal is speed to goal. How do you cover 60 yards as fast as you can reasonably cover? And BIDOL took a long time to put together. We've got 30 years worth of interpretive documentation. We know how that works. Why am I going to mess with that? You know, my goal is a drug for brain cancer patients. And I think a lot of nonprofits have gotten drunk on the idea that if they only found one drug, the royalties from those drugs would keep them going forever. The flaw in that argument to me is I don't want to keep going forever. I want to find the drug quicker, because every day I waste in negotiations, 48 more people die. What a silly, and that's only in one subset of all the brain cancers I deal with. It just drives me crazy to think that a tech transfer officer doesn't get back to me for 2 days because they're busy and working on somebody else. Okay, 96 more people. What are we doing? Well, we're worrying about hypothetical royalties on a technology we know nothing about with a commercial partner that we don't know who it will be. Seems like, in my world, it seems like a monumental waste of time. Because I think there is an infrastructure in place under BIDOL and all the tech transfer infrastructure that basically is going to drive this. Market forces are going to drive it, and then we have to be smart and alert in how we negotiate things. And if we've set it up right, we're partners. We're the yentas in this. It's that idea that when we work with universities, we should be able to figure this out. I think one of the fun things we haven't talked about venture philanthropy is we don't just work with universities, we work with companies.
I want you to bring up the leveraging.
I make grants to companies just as much as I make grants to universities. Our money we consider to be but-for money. It's money that goes places that there's no other funding for, but can fill an important need. We've got a case we're working with the National Cancer Institute. They had funded work at University of California at San Francisco on new ways of imaging the metabolism of tumors. And one of the problems in cancer is you don't know if the drug gets to target. If it gets to target, you don't know that it does anything. What you do is you wait for the person to die and then see if you increase survival time. Kind of a hard metric for those people. This woman developed a magnetic resonance imaging thing that monitored tumor metabolism in prostate cancer. Not relevant to me, but she said, you know, this will work in brain cancer. And in brain cancer, it's a real problem of trying to figure out what's getting where. She could show this. It's cool. That's not really what we fund. That's big science. NCI was funding that. What we did, and we had some talks with NCI, is, okay, if you're funding that, what I can do is pre-align the clinical trials for it, that I'll pay for the human clinical trials as soon as we get to the right data level, and I will have brought you, and what we did here is we found a company that we had already funded that had molecules that impacted tumor metabolism. We said, instead of doing some hokey research compound, let's test it on this real stuff, so we take a year out of the time frame. And we put together a construct with NCI, UCSF, Agios Pharmaceuticals, and us to develop a pre-planned continuum. I didn't want IP to be a consideration in that. You know, they're Agios' molecules. It's UCSF stuff. What are we? We're the Yentas. You know, we're bringing people together. So I'm probably the more radical end of this spectrum, but I count time as a much more valuable component than I count royalty money.
And I actually don't think we disagree at all, because I think my focus on ownership is to keep, to grease the skids, to keep that from being an issue downstream. The same is true of a pre-negotiated license. It's not that it was negotiated. I agree with you. We often fight about things where we don't even know it's going to be successful. But it was essentially a boilerplate agreement. The whole point was, if this works, we ain't going to stop and dicker over the terms. It's going to be done, and we're going to speed this thing into the clinic. So I think the focus on speed is one thing that makes these very attractive partners.
And it does piggyback on what Elana said, where we couldn't do this. It's that standing on the shoulders of giants kind of idea, that nothing we do could make an impact if the federal government hadn't come in and done all the heavy lifting that set it up. On the other hand, the federal government's not really configured to drive into the private marketplace and create drugs that get to patients. And when we look at this continuum, universities don't develop drugs for patients for the most part. What they do is do work that gets put into a commercial enterprise that is willing to do the development, that is then willing to do the marketing and do that. And so it is building kind of an ecosystem that really starts with the federal funding, that goes to the universities, that builds the foundations, and then you need these accelerator mechanisms.
And I can make one comment. The reason NIH is not pushing our discoveries to patients is that government traditionally does not interfere with businesses of private companies, and that's why there was always a separation of functions. So there is a pharmaceutical industry. So, in concluding our discussion on IP, as I mentioned to you, there are multiple models. So all the non-profits are functioning under different business models. Yeah. And and based on those business models, different IP policies are being utilized. And I can give you just a couple of examples of exceptions to the rules which we just heard about. So, and you notice that venture philanthropy works, so the work that they are doing covers the entire spectrum, from basic research to marketing and sales. So basically it's from research and development to access. And many NGOs that are working in specific areas, they are as much concerned with access to actually getting the medications to patients as they are with basic research. So, and in case when we talk about foundation that works in disease area or in indication that has a huge market like cancer, so there is one set of rules. But there are many foundations that are working in areas of, for example, neglected diseases and tropical diseases, where there is no market, so there is market failure. So if they don't take specific IP provisions, even if they develop a beautiful drug, so there is no guarantee that that drug is going to be delivered to patients. So in these situations, multiple NGOs like Medicine for Malaria Venture or all the NGOs concentrating on TB, so they would make special provisions that they must retain IP. Otherwise, there is no way for them to deliver medications to patients. So that's. I think that's a good example that so they are very inventive in ways of handling different IPs. And also the second example I wanted to give you is when the in licensing or out licensing agreement is being established with a pharmaceutical company. So, and pharmaceutical company is developing a very, very specific project. But I joined an NIH from pharmaceutical company, and very often their decision to advance drug is being based not on the science behind the project, but on multiple additional reasons. So, and for foundation, which is sponsoring pharmaceutical company to contract, to conduct research in this very specific area, they cannot take a risk that somebody in that pharmaceutical company is going to make a decision that, yeah, for multiple reasons, we are not pursuing it anymore.
Yeah.
So, and in this situation, so there are also multiple provisions, and foundation can actually take the IP associated with a specific compound back from that pharmaceutical.
Okay. I think I saw a couple.
Max and Mark, I appreciate the football analogy. I think only recently folks in Washington have wanted to use football as a
I thought I was safe doing that
Yes.
here now.
The chain of actors that you've described, to me, the weak link in the process seems to be on the venture capital role. Now, this is an external perspective, but the venture capital as an asset class is doing so poorly. Are you finding you still have good partners on the venture capital side, not the entrepreneurial side, but on the venture side? Are the difficulties in alignment of interest when you're dealing with them?
It's important to think about the motivators for venture capital. I was a big consumer of venture capital in earlier stages of my career. But venture capital funds are 10 years long. They generally invest in the early time and they harvest late. And in the old days, they'd run a fund to completion, and they get a 2% management fee of the funds under management, and they get 20 or 30% of the upside. That's how they work. And when they started, it was people who'd made money elsewhere who came in to invest for rich families. The 2% on a $10 million fund paid their travel and their administrative assistant and that. And they made their money on the upside. It became an MBA specialty. And what they realized was, if you really wanted 2% and you wanted it to work, let's make $1 billion fund, not a $40 million fund.
Yeah.
And then they said, you know, we could stack those funds so that every 3 years, if we showed enough proof of work, we could add another $1 billion fund without ever increasing the size of our team. And 2% of $2 billion begins to add up. And to make that work, they had to turn that money around into liquid exits quickly enough that they had something to show every 3 years.
Yeah.
No biotech company has ever been invested in the history of the world that has been able to achieve a liquid exit in 3 years or get to product revenue. Not if you're doing anything novel. It's a 10-year slog. And what we wound up in life science is a complete mismatch behind the nature of the capital and what we were asking it to do. And what venture did for a while is fudge. They said, well, we'll shorten the timeline that pharma can get to goal. We'll pick all those companies that are already in phase 2 or 3. Well, why haven't those companies had money up to that point? Well, there's something, those aren't the cutting edge companies. Venture basically fled way down the pipeline and became unventury. What they also did is they looked internally and said, who's generating the return in my fund? Because I've got a life science division, I've got an IT division, I've got a clean tech division. We're going to kill the life science guys because they just aren't earning money. And I could have a G4 instead of a Lear if I just got rid of the drag that life science guy is putting on the thing. And so even big funds like Kleiner Perkins, the biggest venture fund in America, quit doing life sciences basically because they had a China fund, a clean tech fund, and software and social media fund. And so I agree that venture is hard. It's partly hard. They're not because they aren't good at it or they don't want to do it. It's the economic dynamics that have driven them way out of the market. And I've quit relying on venture. I mean, I rarely talk to a venture capitalist anymore because I think the easier thing is to find pharma companies that have set up venture-ish units that are looking for new things that have money that now behaves the same way but with slightly different motivators. So I've tended to think venture was yesterday's news.
The flip side of my area of activity, the more we can add value and move toward the opponent's 20-yard line with venture philanthropists and other types of funding, the more likely the VCs that are out there and they
Actually come to the table.
to include us on their flight path. And so we found this to be an incredibly important adjunct tool to attract that kind of attention.
Yes, sir.
Good morning. My name is Michael Simpson. I'm with Computer Sciences Corporation. First off, thank you for all your time, effort, content, and discussion. If you feel like venturing outside of two things, one, the U.S., getting more international in your commentary, and then also venturing outside of life sciences to other kinds of basic research that also are desperately in need. If you would care to talk about that.
One of the areas that I think has been interesting to us, we're looking at China and at Europe in these areas, and I'm not going to drive it down to life science, although that's where we work. What's been very different is that there isn't the same philanthropic culture or legal structure once you get outside the U.S. That we have a culture that this is something done by private individuals. I mean, we're living right in the middle of this. We have built incredible tax incentives in place for them to do it. The pitch that we make now, rather than look like one of those people who stands on the street corner in an orange vest with a hand-lettered cardboard sign saying, please feed Accelerate Brain Cancer Cure because it's important and we're poor. I hate doing that. I can't do that. What I do is I bundle up our projects and I say, you know, it's going to take $5 million to do this. We're going to put in the first $200,000. And I'm going to you, Mr. or Ms. Gotrocks, because you're kind of interested in this. And I said, look, I got a deal. I'm going to treat you like a venture investor, but I know you're not. And I know you want to do something important. And what I also know is you've got a G4 and you got all the fuel you need and you don't need to get any richer. So I'm not going to try and peddle you stock certificates that'll make you money. What I'm going to do is let you change the world, and I'm going to give you tickets to heaven if you make this investment. And you probably need more tickets to heaven. That works great in my high-tech Silicon Valley, Steve Case-driven world, because the joke about new economy entrepreneurs is they have really deep pockets and really short arms, and they're not good philanthropic targets. They are, though, really good investment targets for entrepreneurially driven research. And so the paradigm is shifting, I think, in the U.S., even about how we raise our money. What happens when I go to Europe is, well, but the government's always done that. There aren't the incentives. There isn't the culture. I mean, the biggest foundation in Britain that we talked to that did this, they thought a big gift was $25,000. $25,000 barely turns the lights on in the deals that we look at. And the challenge to me in getting over there is the culture doesn't fit a philanthropy model. And I don't really think that we're philanthropists anyway. I think we're venture capitalists in drag. But you know, it's hard to match this up. And what intrigues us about China is I think it may work in China, but for different reasons. That China wants to build an economy. It wants to drive innovation. That people like status and station. They wouldn't mind making money, but we're putting together private and government constructs in China that are motivated by different things. The venture philanthropy, as we kind of first characterized it here, is kind of a uniquely American institution.
I'll speak, I agree with Max's comments about outside the U.S., but let me speak for a moment about outside of the biotech and healthcare. We're using this approach in a way to develop a bit of a hybrid to what you've heard talked about here. So obviously the first model everyone thinks about is a foundation like Max's, Michael J. Fox, Accelerate Brain Cancer Cure, juvenile diabetes, cystic fibrosis. Examples.
Very cause-driven, personally cause-driven.
And great examples, and again, there are a number of them that have slight variations on this theme that are very effective. We've actually taken this theme and used it with our philanthropy colleagues at UVA to develop a new model of approaching donors specifically interested in UVA. And so, for example, the best example I can give you is in the healthcare area, but we're now beginning to morph this into other areas of the university. We have a project that we call Launchpad Diabetes that started out as a pure philanthropic play. We had an entrepreneur in Charlottesville who sold his baby food company for $1 billion. And you know, my wife was a development officer, so I say this, like vultures, the development folks began to circle. They spent that $1 billion and wondered how much they could get for good old UVA. And like many philanthropists today, particularly newer, made money. They don't want to just hand over a check for $1 million or $10 million and say, go do good. They see it as an investment.
Yes.
And so we worked out a program where this philanthropist funds a program called Launchpad Diabetes. He has 2 children with juvenile diabetes. And we have a translational research proof of concept program where we solicit proposals once a year Those proposals are, again, require clinicians and team of basic scientists to pursue market-relevant, clinically relevant goals, milestone-driven quarterly reviews, will-to-kill projects, and we give him an annual report that tells him how we did, and he then decides whether to renew the program. We're starting to use that same approach with philanthropists interested in environmental sciences and clean technology and other areas of the university, but who would like, instead of giving us $1 million or $2 million, might be willing to talk about a larger gift, but love the idea of having it used in a very focused, relevant, societally or market-relevant way, and we're willing to work with them in that capacity.
And just from our research, we're starting to collect data from a wide range of universities, and we're seeing foundation funding in some surprising places. It is coming into departments that are not health-related, very much the energy, the materials.
But they're cause and passion related.
Right.
And we lapse into healthcare because it is so immediate. And often these things are driven by life and death, but people have passions in plenty of other places. To me, the key is matching money, passion, technology, research. And that's the constant.
The curriculum and education area in particular.
An example is the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation recently received $2.5 million for putting petroleum.
Well, guilt's a wonderful thing. I mean, ask Michael Milken.
Yeah.
I mean, the redemption tour goes, you
Yes.
know, and we'll take their money, whatever the cost.
Andrew Carnegie said when he gave his money to start the library stuff, it was the happiest thing in his life because he got the Astors and the other people to kick in.
Oh yeah, you want to use every motivator. I think the giving challenge that Warren Buffett and Bill Gates put in has been wonderful because it plays to all that same insecurity. You want to be part of this club, you want to be a cool kid, pledge half your assets and give them away. And it's drawn some very interesting people out of the woodwork. And in fact, they've created foundations just so they could do that.
Yes.
Thank you. Very interesting conversation. So this seems to me is like an enterprise, private sector, government, academia. So who's really designing this enterprise? Or this is totally organic, which means that it's a hit or a miss.
I love the free market because I think people head to open space. Continuing our football analogy, they see where the hole is in the line and they run to it, and they run to it for their various interests. And my fear, if you tried to design this, is we never could have come up with it, and it would have worked for a short period of time, and then it would have become obsolete. And the roiling of the free market is what makes this work. I mean, I feel like I'm trying to learn every day what somebody else is doing. Say, you know, I could go there. I mean, in the last year, we changed our entire development path. We run a big event. We run a 14,000 person walk here in DC that is the diesel engine that runs our organization. Now I'm packaging my things up and going and buying racing engines to do specific things. Well, this is just an evolution of kind of the new marketplace. And so I like the fact that there are no rules. It's the Wild West. Some are going to work, some aren't. But, you know, everybody, in fact, I hate it when my staff comes in and says, we're going to use best practices. Because when we use best practices, what that means is those were yesterday's best ideas. And I want them to come in with tomorrow's best ideas. And that we're based on risk, and that I think we have to embrace risk, that it is I'm talking to a business school professor about free market risk.
Maybe I can, instead of use the word design, say organize, or do you need it organized? You have the same.
Well, there are organizations that are popping up to really speak for this mode of, you know, funding and research. So,
but Mark and I were talking tonight. We were sitting down in the thing, and he's looking at his iPhone. I said, isn't it amazing that we can sit here and communicate through satellites to people around America? When we started, we shared a fax machine in the entire building at the university. If somebody tried to organize how we were going to do business, we never would have figured it out. I think we need organizing principles. It's like you needed standards for cell phones. And, you know, you're seeing the IRS come in. There was a big change in IRS regulation this year. We did a deal with a company that had just brought a technology out of University of Southern California. I knew the entrepreneur. I thought he was smart. I knew how private investors worked. I was brand new in my job. And if you had a net worth of more than $2 million, you could make a private investment in an unregistered company. So we had that much in the bank. And I said, we'll make an investment, $200,000 investment. We got partway down the path and realized the rules were different for nonprofits. $5 million net worth, so we couldn't do it. And we might be scrutinized because it really wouldn't be part of our endowment portfolio, which was the tax grading standard. So we concocted a BS story and did what we called a participating grant. We gave him the 200. We said, if you ever earn a penny, give us our 200 back. And if you earn $10 million, double it and give us 200 more back and we'll stay evergreen. Well, that's kind of a crude mechanism. I would have rather had stock. Well, this year, the IRS came out and said, you know, if it's cause related, if it is what you do, you can buy stock in startup enterprises that further your research goals. My toolkit just doubled in size because IRS made a simple regulatory interpretation that fostered where we could go. So I think the standardization is important, but it's going to come from a lot of interesting and funny places.
Yeah, I want to take one more question, then I'll add in.
Well, I'm sorry I came in late, but I wonder if anybody on the panel discussed the downside of venture capital. Or just all cheery.
We have. Do you want to touch with that? Because we.
Do you have one particular one in mind?
And we have.
Yeah, but in many cases it's inappropriate because there are so many issues that don't lend themselves so easily as healthcare, development of drugs, as we're discussing, and that make it fairly clearly relevant to that arena. That's the low-hanging fruit in the array of issues that private philanthropy is meant to consider. And the misapplication of some reasonable business principles to the entire nonprofit world, which some business school professors advocate, leads to this emphasis on measurable outcomes, for example, like what's your bottom line, profit and loss statement, leads to easily measurable outcomes, which may be trivial. So there is just put in that small footnote that venture philanthropy is a model that works in certain fields where the development of a product that can be sold is the outcome, but it has to be understood as not being applicable in a serious way to the whole range of nonprofit concerns.
But there, and I will agree with you, but I also think one of the questions is what are the right metrics? And in some cases, it's not just profit, and if you set your metrics to other things, then some of these passion ideas can come. But there are, you are very right, there are some challenges, there are some downsides that we need to be considering with this method of funding. There are possible downsides for the university in terms of the overhead and the way that things are structured with some of these relationships. There's possibilities, there's problems, as you mentioned, where you need somebody with a passion to get the funding, and who, it's not that broader. Is this just something that is a great idea that should be pushed forward? There's got to be somebody, you hope that somebody has your disease or somebody has that passion. I don't know if you want to bring out some of the other downsides.
Go back to your cystic fibrosis, that would have spoken to it.
But any tool can be badly wielded, and I don't like to make rules to prevent the bad wielding of tools. I think this is a consensual game. I have money, I'm looking to give it away. You need money for something, do you want it? Can we negotiate a bargain in the middle that makes sense? If it's a badly negotiated bargain, whose fault is that? Don't take the damn money.
How many universities do that? How many universities do you
Well, but that's not a problem with venture philanthropy. That's a problem with university governance and the metrics you put on them.
Yes.
But that does sell their soul.
Probably, I'll always take money if anyone wants to give it.
I think you're right.
Because it's a duty to give, and so it's not a zero-sum game. Something good is going to happen. Whether it's as good as it could be, that's open to debate. But in the meantime, thank you for a great panel, guys.
Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.